your health, your way, your community. Make the change. Join the movement.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Academy. Today we've got a very special guest, Mike Wilkerson, and he's friends of many of our friends from over the other side of the world, Alex Zek and Mike Winner and all of those guys, and has presented at Music and Sky and a bunch of other places around the world. And today we're talking about biogeology and a critical view of the mainstream geological narratives. So welcome, Mike. Thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you for the invite. It's wonderful to be here. I heard about your event this summer, and it sounds like it was an awesome experience for everyone involved. And I had an invite. I would have liked to have come, but I wasn't able to. I needed to work. I had just, like you said, done a couple of different events and had to get back to real life. And it's wonderful to be here and to present these things. And
well, maybe our next one. So it'll be around the same time of year. So we'll chat about that separately. But first of all, I want to get a bit of an overview. You've got a very interesting bio. One of the things that jumps out is your ventures into the hacking world. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, and then how you got into what you're doing now. So it sounds like you've got a thirst for researching and delving deep into places that they don't want us to go. So how about we start with that?
Yeah, I definitely have always been interested in asking unconventional questions and poking my nose in where it doesn't belong. When I was a teen, in my early teens, I was a computer hobbyist, and then eventually got involved with hacking. And I had lots of friends around the country that I was interacting with. And this is long before the internet as we know it. It was all dial-up at the time, but we would do teleconferencing. And as I got a little older, I started flying around to meet some of these people, and it was quite the adventure. And then eventually I got busted. 2 weeks after I turned 18, I was in Seattle, and I got caught and was charged with 4 counts of illegal computer trespass for infiltration of Microsoft, a subsidiary of Boeing, Kenworth Trucking, and Sunstrand. So that led to a court case, and it took about a year to complete, and resulted in me being incarcerated for a brief time. So I have the dubious distinction of having been the first hacker in the world to serve time for hacking. So it's an unusual part of my past. I've written a book that I just never seem to get around to actually publishing because I'm not interested in all the marketing involved. But it's basically done, and it needs to be polished and put out there. So people keep hounding me for it, and I'm going to do my best to get that out in the next few months. So that's.
I think it's funny that some of these things that we've done that the mainstream think are bad seem to be badges of honor within our community, and it actually gives you credibility when you do these things. And it seems to be the same thing with the backs, or those who stepped up and did different things. And you see the doctors who stepped up and all of these different things. So I think it's a very interesting world where things are flipping. And those who have done the right thing and tried to discover and delve deeper and ask the right questions are now being respected and asked to speak at different events around the world. So
yeah, it's definitely turned the corner in the last couple of years, especially with all the people that exposed the lies through COVID. It's they are definitely living legends and heroes. I hesitate to put anyone on a pedestal nowadays, but people who I've met in person, who I've gotten to know, who I can sense are authentic, they're my heroes now.
Well, let's go a little bit deeper. So you've stepped into the chiropractic world after you finished your short career in the hacking world, but you've continued your research. So where did your interest sort of go from there? So obviously you had this thirst, and did you find anything? Are you allowed to talk about anything about what you found when you were hacking, or were you just playing around and you found a whole bunch
I
of?
was just playing around. The one of the newspapers described it as a high-tech joyride, and I think that's probably the shortest, best description of what I was doing. Like, you see the Ferrari there with the keys in and the motor running. It's like, oh, just take it around the block. I had a very small little Apple computer, and the mainframes and the supercomputers were very interesting to me, and it wasn't something I was going to get my hands on anytime soon. So it was a way to dip into those. And then also we were hacking the phone system big time. So that made it possible to do all kinds of things that people didn't even know were possible. So
And one of our local people here, Julian Assange, has just been brought home. What's your thoughts? And did you ever cross paths with those guys back in the day?
I never crossed paths with him. And I can't remember what year, because he was originally busted for hacking long before the whole WikiLeaks saga came along. And I I went to jail 10 years before Kevin Mitnick, who a lot of people consider to be the most famous hacker who ever lived. He passed away during COVID, actually. Um, so I was in and out of the game long before a lot of the top names in hacking came along. They were contemporaries. They were active at the same time, but uh, he was across the pond. Mendax, I think, was his handle. I never came across him. No.
And do you think that the fact that you were 18 and 2 weeks had anything to do with it? Was that just sheer
No, I
luck?
had I had turned to 18 2 weeks before, so it never went to trial because I pled guilty and plea bargained. But had I gone to trial, I would have been tried as an adult, and so they had leverage there, and that was one of the main reasons they were able to get jail time. I had the distinction of or the misfortune of having landed in the state with the strictest laws for hacking, and the guy who penned the law or co-wrote the law was the one who was assigned to my case as a prosecuting attorney. So he had a vested interest in a conviction and specifically jail time, and they really wanted to send a message. This was 2 years after War Games came out, so any teen with a modem wanted to be a hacker after that. So they wanted to send a clear message to people: don't do this. The consequences will be dire.
I find it interesting with the hacking, especially someone like Julian, who didn't falsify any documents, didn't do anything, but shared, the information that was there. And so that's illegal, but they can falsify, they can make up, they can do whatever they like with no repercussions. And so it's a very upside down world. But I think what we're going to talk about tonight is going a little bit deeper about how upside down it is. And we've got a bit of a series on here. We've done a few different episodes and we call it But What If? And But What If was true? And some of these things we don't know are true. But, there's evidence to suggest that maybe it is. And what consequences would that have if that was to be true? And I think that that's a lot of your work. It's from what I've seen, it's asking the questions, and it's almost ruling out, what we know is probably more likely to be false. And, that seems to be a little bit easier to discern because we can see what they're covering up or what they're trying to do to keep us away from asking certain questions. So where would you like to start? You've got a bit of a presentation for us. Is there anything else you want to share before we get
Yeah,
started?
I think but what if is the best place to start. Where so many things that we've been taught are fact, and we're told that they're proven and settled science, and science is never settled, and that's not how things work. So um, I think this is a pretty open-minded group in general. It's not like I'm speaking to a room full of academics with degrees or something. So this might be an easier sell, but in general, I operate from the perspective of outlandish claims require outlandish evidence. And so I'm not interested in anecdotal stuff. I'm not interested in just photographs that look like something. I want to see, is there more to it? And so with that, I can just jump into the presentation.
Yeah, I'll click over now. All right, that's showing for you.
Yeah. Gigantism, rapid petrification, biogeology. You see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. So yeah, that's the subject matter, and that's what I've been looking into for the last 10 years, really. And I'll get into how I came to these subjects and just real briefly talk about my quote unquote qualifications, because for the topics that I'll be talking about today, I'm technically not qualified at all. I have a bachelor's from UCSB in California in Italian cultural studies, which is essentially a classics degree. And later on, I went and studied at the uh, Scandinavian College of Chiropractic to get a degree in chiropractic. So I'm definitely familiar with the scientific method. On the screen there is my master's thesis in for the chiropractic education, and that translates to spinal manipulation technique and its effects on visceral disease, which was a very heady topic and an incredibly difficult subject to tackle. And so for the last 13 years, I've been working as a chiropractor in Spain. I consider myself a cross-disciplinary researcher. I'm not an expert in geology at all. I've never even studied it formally, so take everything I say today with a grain of salt. But I think this is really the way academia should work, but it doesn't, because in general there's a compartmentalization and everyone becomes little experts in their little tiny subject, and there's not a whole lot of crosstalk, especially in different ologies, right? You've got these everyone's in their little box, and they're afraid to venture outside of it or criticize things that don't make sense to them, because they figure, well, I'm not an expert in that subject, so who am I to bring up any questions? But this is really how things should be working, is people should be collaborating and sharing information. And I coined the term biogeology. Well, coined isn't the right word. I appropriated it. The definition of it is there on the bottom. It's a very little used term to describe the interaction between the biosphere and the lithosphere. So how things percolate upward into the atmosphere. But if anything that I'm sharing today has any basis in truth, then there's really a need to distinguish between geological narratives and timelines, which I'll get into, and a far more direct connection between biology and geology, which is really the subject matter of today. So these are the things that we're not really allowed to question. If you start to question any of these people, the mainstream thinkers will call you a fool or a crackpot or a conspiracy theorist. But I've always been interested in pulling back the curtain, just like Toto, and I think that we should all do that instead of just be afraid of the emperor. Also, I think it's a really good intellectual exercise. People are afraid to dive into these things, and there should be no fear. It's fun. Like, for example, Earth shape. It's bastardized, or not bastardized, but it's demonized as a topic. If you even begin to contemplate that the Earth might not be what we were taught, you're just a fool. And I think it's fun to examine the evidence on both sides of things. So for people who haven't gone into the moon landings and 9/11 and this is probably going to be hard to swallow, but I think that it's the more you dig into those things, the more you find that there's a lot of hoaxery. And so this started for me 10 years ago when a friend of mine, Alex Michael, also known as Conspiracy Music Guru, hit me with the idea that maybe the Earth wasn't what we were taught. And it took me months to wrap my head around it. And I kept coming back to him with all kinds of different things that I thought were proof that he was wrong. And he just shot them down one by one. Everything from fisheye lenses to the ISS fakery and the moon landings. And I was already on board with the idea that the moon landings might be a hoax, but it really started for me with some images that I took of Ibiza, which is 90 kilometers off the coast here. And I was able to take this photograph here with my phone. I didn't even have powerful optics. And here you can see this little island is called Esvedra. These are the two tallest peaks on Ibiza, and this is a saddle that sits at 200 meters. And at that distance and my viewing altitude, that saddle there should have been on the horizon. And you can see the top peak, I think, is 457 meters or something like that. You can see that the entire saddle is there, and that shouldn't be there at all. So I'm not saying it's flat, but I don't think it's what we think it is. I'm open to lots of possibilities when it comes to Earth shape. So I dug into a lot of these subjects 10 years ago. They're really in vogue now. You can find thousands of videos on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube talking about mud floods and star forts and Antiquitech and the World's Fairs and all of these topics, and especially Tartary. And my take on it all from pretty early on was that it wasn't any one of these things, it was probably all of them. And people get in their little pet conspiracy theory and they want to apply that to everything rather than understanding that there's probably an overlap between all of these things. And we're really looking at hidden history and a previous realm that was magnificent, the traces of which are everywhere. We have pyramids on every continent in the thousands. We've got star forts in the tens of thousands. A friend of mine named Mike, he goes by the moniker 13th Monkey. He's mapped out star forts on every continent, and you know they number in the thousands, and they just don't match the mainstream narratives. About 8 years ago, I got turned on to this theory, which was pretty mind-blowing. The idea that maybe some of these plateaus around the world are former tree stumps, and they kind of look like tree stumps, but are they? And in the mainstream narrative, they would tell us, no, no, these are basalt. This is all coming from volcanic activity, and we'll touch on that in a second. So these are just some examples of some of these plateaus, and a lot of them have these never-ending waterfalls that come from the top and don't make sense because that water couldn't have come as a result of rainfall. And these are just flying by just to introduce the idea. And in the mainstream, we're presented with ideas like this in the form of fairy tale and fiction. This is a scene from the movie Avatar, where they bring down the great mother tree. And this was the top grossing film for many years in the world. And I think that that's because there's something in our collective unconscious that just knows that this isn't fiction, that this actually occurred. And a lot of people shed tears. I sure did when I saw this tree come down. And yeah, and I'm going to be touching a lot on the trees. I'll get to my own research in the last third of this presentation, but I think this is really talking about an antediluvian past before the great floods, which have been noted by all of the civilizations around the world. That there was this time when things were gigantic and the world was very different from what it is today. Even in the mainstream geological narrative, we have these, they tell us that there was megaflora and megafauna. We get the stories of dinosaurs, but we also are told that the vegetation was far greater, and even bugs like dragonflies could have reached a meter in size. If we go back to the pre-NASA days of the cosmological models, you find that pretty much all of the civilizations described us as being in a cosmic egg, which I think is really a representation of our realm. And I'm more in alignment with something like a toroidal shape than a ball. It could be concave, it could be hollow. I don't know what it is. I just know what it isn't based on the lack of evidence for the claims. This is the Norse mythology describing the world tree, and it's known as Yggdrasil. And then at the center of that plane, we had the Rupes Nigra, which is the Great Mountain, which is a magnetic mountain. And this may be why our compasses point north. And there are old maps that show this four-continent system, many of them, and that has since been removed from the modern maps. And I think that that's it's definitely a tip of the hat to the old world and maybe the real structure of our realm. And then there are different theories about whether, you know, it's an infinite plane and whether it stretches outward. There's this map comes from, I think, it's 6 centuries old, and it comes from a Tibetan monastery showing lots of extra continents. This is from something called Norb theory, just looking at this particular model in a beautiful way with some pretty compelling graphics. So, a lot of people are familiar with this Devil's Tower in Wyoming. It's the largest example of columnar basalt in the world, and the mainstream model tells us that this is formed by volcanic activity, and that the molten lava is coming upward, and it's cooling, and this quick cooling is leading to these stress fractures, which are hexagonal, and that's what's forming these columns. And my question is, why is it, if that's true, do we never ever see lava doing anything like this? We never see a straight line ever when lava is cooling. That's what lava looks like, and yet we're given these structures and told that this was done by lava. And to me, that makes no sense whatsoever. This is far more likely something that grew. And a lot of people talk about the silica era, which is this time when things were made of silica. I personally don't believe that's what happened. I believe that this era of gigantism was biological in the same way it is today, but that through some cataclysmic event, things turned to stone. So I don't think that they grew as silica. I think that's a misconception. And you can see here these hexagonal shapes are also in larger hexagonal shapes. And this is exactly how biological structures grow. Things like tendons, things like structures within plants and trees as well. And if this was something from cooling lava, how would you explain this diagonal shape? This wasn't cut. This just stopped and cooled in that fashion. It makes no sense really when you look at it critically, I think. And then you can see there's this curving to it, which also matches biology to a T. And what they're telling us, they're a number of different theories in the mainstream, but they're all basically parroting the same narrative, which is that this is cooling lava, and that 50 million years ago, the Earth was up here, and that as the lava flowed upward and was surrounded by this Earth, and there was some massive cooling, which may have happened during the last ice age, especially if it happened suddenly, which is possible because we can find to this day frozen woolly mammoths that are just, you know, they were instantly frozen to the degree that their meat is still edible, apparently. But the basic idea is that over the last 50 million years, all of this earth that surrounded this structure has all eroded, and it's left this structure sticking upward. And my question then is, where did all that earth go? So if they were once trees, which is a plausibility, I'm not attached to the theory. I think there's far more compelling evidence than the tower, than the what do you call them? The plateaus, also known as tepuis. That those are data points, but they're not conclusive. And I think if you take it as a gestalt and you look at all the data points together, which I'll be going through in this presentation, then it's far more compelling. But to say that this is unequivocal proof that this was once a tree, I think is a mistake. And then the question is, well, if it was a tree, and if these other plateaus were trees, why are the tops flat? Who cut them down? How? Was this some kind of magical technology? Was it lasers? Was it aliens? And I made a short video called Felling Titanic Trees, where I just present something known as a diamond rope saw, which is basically like steampunk technology that all you need is a rope that is embedded with diamond and two different motors and pulleys, and you can over time you can cut down very, very large structures. I don't have clips in this presentation, but this is how they cut through massive amounts of marble in different quarries. They use these diamond rope saws to this day. We have all the mythological tales of Paul Bunyan going around, a mountain-sized man cutting down trees with his ox. I always forget it. It's Blue, I think, or I don't remember his name, the ox's name. But Clash of the Titans was a movie that I loved as a kid, where Perseus has to first defeat the Gorgon, also known as Medusa, in order to steal her head, because her head, even after death, is capable of petrifying anything on sight. And so it's interesting that we have these stories. We have Cthulhu, we have lots of different mythological tales in the history books that talk about this idea of things turning to stone. A lot of people are looking at this sort of thing and claiming that these are definitely petrified creatures. I would say, well, for this one, what about looking at this from other angles? What about if the shadows are not there? Is it going to look the same? And this may just be something known as pareidolia, which is when you recognize a pattern that you see something, a shape, a face, and it looks like it, but it's not really there. And so what I would suggest to all the people who are sharing those kinds of images is, try and get boots on the ground. Try and see it from lots of different angles. Because, for example, these images here, if I were to flip these, I might see an entirely different face. Just because it looks like a face from one angle doesn't mean that it is a face. And if it is a face, why is the entire head the same kind of stone? There should be, like, we have lots of different tissues. We have eyes and we have cartilage, and if it were a face, why would it all petrify to the same thing? This is one of the best images that I've seen of something that might be a Titan outside of some of my own research. And I have a little video clip here, which I'll share of that. This is the first time I've seen actual video of this. You see that? Let's see. And if this was truly a Titan, then you should be able to get up in those eye sockets and you should be able to find anatomy that matches the anatomy of an eye socket. And to this day, nobody's really done that. And so I think, people need to really step back before they make claims about things and apply the scientific method. It's okay to have interesting questions, even if they're considered crazy by the mainstream, and to have hypotheses, but you've got to develop testable predictions, and then you got to go out and gather data, and that should lead you into a feedback loop where you're refining and altering your hypothesis, and then eventually developing general theories and making more observations, and this is a loop, and it should be a constant state of refinement. So problem I have with this, and when I entered into this, again, I thought this would be a fun intellectual exercise. This is not just me jumping off a cliff and going into woo-woo land. I think that everyone should be aware of these problems. I already mentioned pareidolia, photographs from one angle, shadows, foliage, a lot of AI photoshopped images. You can see that in the next slide. People are just pointing at things and claiming they are what they look like. And there's no on-site investigation. They're not doing anatomical correlations. There's no histological analysis. Histology is the study of tissues. As a chiropractor, I studied this a great deal in school. And so that was one of the things that prepared me to start to recognize some of these patterns in stones that, in my opinion, shouldn't be there unless there was some kind of a truth to the narrative. So no lab work, no microscopy, and like I said, all the different tissues are all just one type of stone instead of petrifying to different kinds of things. And a lot of people are looking at aerial shots on Google Earth, and it looks just like a face or just like a body that's laying there embedded in the earth. But if you were to turn that thing 180 degrees, you might see an entirely different kind of body or shape. And that's getting back to this idea of pareidolia. And then the absolutism is like, for example, the meltology thing started to take off. Every mountain on Earth was once a melted building. Every this is a that. Every that is a this. And I think anytime you get into absolutism, you're always going to be wrong. See what I did there? So this is AI, and so is this. and this was the original image. So there's so much AI going around now, and AI has gotten so sophisticated that unless you're somebody who has been discerning for a long time, it's damn near impossible to distinguish fiction from reality now. So we're in a brave new world. And these are some of the pitfalls with this kind of research. These are the things that I've been accused of. And pareidolia, we've already talked about. Apophenia is basically the same thing, but it's recognizing a pattern that doesn't exist rather than seeing an image of something and thinking it's an animal in the clouds, for example. Dunning-Kruger effect is here. This is what I'm accused of as well. I've never studied geology formally. Just open a geology book. You'll find out what a fool you've been. Yeah, but if cornerstones of geology are based on erroneous thinking or falsified research or faulty dating techniques, then maybe we need to start from scratch and look at our reality in a different way. So, and then this is the idea. Once you know a little bit about something, you think you're an expert, and then eventually, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know anything about what you're talking about. So that's the Dunning-Kruger effect, and I may be guilty of it, or I may be recognizing things that people are who are indoctrinated and have letters after their names can't recognize because they've been blinded by their paradigm. I coined the term paradigm blindness to describe why, if there's any truth to the things in this presentation, we are not seeing it, and it's quite frankly because we've been trained not to see it. Doctrine of signatures has to do with things look like things. You can find flowers that look like animals. You can find lots of things that look like things. So in general, the experts will just hand wave dismiss things without actually going into the subject and looking at evidence that's countering their beliefs about their ology. And ironically, this is particularly true among, flat earthers who should be some of the most open-minded of all. I've had many criticisms of my research from some of the more prominent flat earthers, and they're committing the same logical fallacies as everyone else when it comes to hand wave dismissing research without even going into it. And I know they haven't gone into it because of the kinds of criticisms that they're raising. So here we get into the subject of gravity and why the mainstream tells us that gigantism couldn't possibly exist. There's something known as the square cube law, which says that as things grow in size, their volume increases dramatically and their mass increases as well. And so the mass would be so great that the object wouldn't be able to support itself because it would collapse under its own weight as a result of its gravitational pull. So I would suggest to people that they look into gravity and realize that maybe it's not based on fact either. I could refer to the work of Steve Young and his book A Fool's Wisdom, or the most recent book by a man named Mark Gober called An End to Upside Down Cosmology. Both are very excellent books for debunking some of the mainstream scientific narratives. So just a little 1-2 minute crash course in the rock cycle. It starts off as sedimentary, where things, plant life and creatures die and are compressed over long periods of time. And then that compression gets greater and greater, and it starts to melt and morph, and we call it metamorphic rock. And this is your harder stones like granite and marble and the stones that have swirls in them that look very much like biology, but they couldn't possibly be biology. But they were biology even in the mainstream narrative, but hundreds of millions of years ago, and then that got pressurized. And once that pressure gets great enough, it'll literally melt and become magma, and then that's pushed up through fissures, and then we call those volcanoes, and then that comes out as igneous stone. And we know igneous stone is real, as they tell us, because we can watch it happening and coming out of the volcanoes and watch it cooling. And this is just a visual representation of that. And then they have the dating of all of these things are in the millions of years, hundreds of millions of years. The Earth is said to be 4.6 billion years old, I think, and or something like that. And the universe 16.4 billion years. And they know this because of their telescopes, and they can look back to the beginning of time and see when the Big Bang happened. And there are lots of claims that are made, but they talk about how old the fossils are based on the layer that they're in, and they talk about how old the layer is based on which fossils are found in it. And that is known as circular reasoning. We're told that these are formed over tens of thousands and even millions of years, these sedimentary layers. And it's interesting that they're banded in a way where it's like the Earth did one color, and then it did another, and then it went back to the previous color, and then it went back, and there's this alternating color that it almost looks like seasonal growth. The Big Bang I mentioned. This is just looking at the various stories that are told about all the different periods, the Jurassic and the Triassic and the Permian and the Pleistocene. And even in the mainstream model, we have these 5 great dyings off of cataclysm that, you know, the dinosaurs wiped out 65 million years ago. But before that, there were 4 other dyings off that have been recognized in the geological model. So this isn't such a far-fetched idea. This, however, might be a far-fetched idea. I think that there's probably far more evidence for dragons, which were talked about by all of the cultures, and there's a lot of funny business when it comes to dinosaurology. And again, these are layers that we're told form over thousands of years, but a geologist, I'm not going to play the whole video
grains were
because
being
of time,
propelled
but
over the surface
he's basically
in a slurry,
showing,
the particles separated coarse and fine into thin layers. I had thought that a catastrophe would mix up all the particles and make a homogenized deposit. Boy, was I wrong. Right here, a pyroclastic flow moving at freeway speed or higher can separate particles into coarse and fine. So layering doesn't require millions of years, thousands of years, or even hundreds of years. It can form rapidly in this slurry flow process.
Right, so that happened in a matter of hours at Mount St. Helens. Pyroclastic flows, we're told, can move at the speed of sound, and they can reach temperatures of up to 1400 degrees Celsius, which is incredibly hot. And with the speed of the wind, that would make it way, way hotter. But those layers formed in a matter of hours. So if that can happen with a single volcanic activity, what would happen if the whole ring of fire were going off at the same time and there were thousands of volcanoes that were erupting? Just to go back to that petrogenesis model that I just laid out, do these structures make any sense based on that model? To me, this looks far more biological. And I struggle to see how layering could create these kinds of structures. Or these, again, where we've got the Earth doing one thing and then it goes back to another color and then it does another thing. Because we're told that this is turned upward like this because of tectonic activity, plates have collided, and that's why these are vertical. These are concentric rings. These are known as concretions. And if you look at this rock here, this is amazing with all the fine detail of layering, and it's just sitting on this structure. And then you can see these layers go back and around, and this looks far more like a biological, almost cellular structure than anything that could have formed in that fashion that I just described. And if you look at something like this, again, you know, you're hard pressed. All the geologists will be able to come up with some, you know, explanation for how this was formed. But the question is, if you're using Occam's razor, what makes more sense? Their far-fetched explanation, or something simple like this was originally biological and then it became geological, hence the term biogeology. This is a site known as I've forgotten the name of it now. White Bluffs. Oh, White Pocket is the name of this. And to me, again, this is just clearly an example of something that was biology not so long ago. Whether it was a plant life or an animal life, I don't know. So petrification is an indisputable fact. We've got we've got actual petrified logs that can be found. This is a petrified pine cone. This is a petrified ammonite. Things that are petrified and locked in death throes, and the petrification clearly happened very quickly. They tell us that this formed over hundreds of millions of years, and that's BS in my opinion, because they can create petrified wood in a laboratory in about 24 hours. And this particular study, they created it over a 7-year period where they just dropped wood into volcanic waters that were high mineral content waters. And after 7 years, they had fully petrified wood. But they've also been able to reproduce it in a laboratory in the space of, I think, 2 days. And the interesting thing about their laboratory produced petrified wood is it's indistinguishable from the normal petrified wood, even when looking under a microscope. So, hundreds of millions of years or a couple days in a laboratory. So this has been my approach to everything, using the scientific method, more than just analysis of aerial footage, but looking at anatomical histological correlations, microscopy, CAT scans, endoscopy. We'll get into all of that in a moment. And I think the great trees were very much a real thing, and they're still here. People ask, where did they go? They're still here, but we've been blinded to the truth of that. So this is just a little review of what wood looks like as it's breaking down. Each one of these little pieces could be hundreds of feet wide. And the different myriad of ways in which wood can manifest are infinite when it comes to the color, when it comes to the swirls, when it comes to so many different things. And you've got burning to take into consideration. You've got fungal, fungal factors. You've got bacteria. You've got termites. All of these different things could affect how this stuff manifests. But when you see this break down, eventually this becomes the forest floor. And if it turns to sandstone, which I believe much of it does, then it eventually becomes sand. So these are from the work of Hangman 1128. I traveled with him in July in the in the Black Hills of South Dakota and went to the Garden of the Gods in Colorado. And he's showing unequivocal evidence of the big trees. And if you have the eyes to see it, you can see it for what it is. The sap turns into quartz, and the grain is all there. From the micro to the macro, it manifests to perfection. I'll show some even better pictures in a moment. But this is all clearly tree, in my opinion. And a piece like this, you can pull off, and you can still see the fibers on the inside. So I got to tour this site, and when you're there in person, it is just undeniably tree. And you can see all of the micrograin. And if you just think of sap leaking out of a tree and the knots of a tree, it's pretty clear what that is. I'm going to skip this one due to time. And again, this is what petrified wood looks like. Whoops. Oh, there we go. So everything that I just showed you is identical in every way, but this is on a smaller scale. And we see this marbling, we see the different ways in which it breaks down are identical to those larger structures that I just showed you. And what a lot of people don't know about petrified wood is that a lot of our gemstones come from it. For example, opal is wood. A lot of people don't realize that. They go into opal mines and they break up the structures, and then they pull out the opal. And if you look at everything around the opal, you see that it also looks like wood. In fact, I have a video clip where the guy picks up a piece. He's like, wow, that looks like petrified wood. And it's like, well, yeah, because it is. And the opal is the sap that's embedded, and then it gets this birefringence, which is why certain stones have this reflective quality because of the way the light catches it. Also, metals come from tree. A lot of people don't know this. Now, I'm not saying that trees grow metal. I'm saying that after the transmutation process of some cataclysmic event, whether it involves electricity, whether it involves plasma, that the sap or whatever structures or elements that are in the tree are literally turning to metal. This is obsidian, which is also it's also tree, and there's videos that I have on my channel, and Hangman has that you can see the in-between stages where it's like clearly tree grain, and then it actually, because of heat, it starts to melt and it becomes glassy. We call that vitrification. Vitro means glass, glassification, and rainbow obsidian is just simply glassified tree. So there were petrified forests all over the realm that were harvested. We have these little petrified forests now that you can go pay to see. But a friend of mine, Ben, from the channel The Archivist, Waking Up with Analog, he's archived tens of thousands of newspaper articles from the 1880s to the 1920s, before the Rockefellers took over medicine and education and publishing. And he's shown that there are many examples of them going and harvesting this wood, and it was filled with silver and gold to the tune of, in this particular article, they're talking about $15,000 of silver to the ton, but that's 100 years ago money. So what would that be? Millions of dollars of silver to the ton, harvested from petrified trees. Not something we've ever been taught about. So you can go back and read these if you like, and just pause the video. So again, just more examples of gold and silver coming from not just gold, silver, but copper and other metals as well. And there's several of these maps that have shown this is the former Giza Plateau, according to this artist's rendition. And you can see that pyramids are actually parked on top of what look like tree stumps. Just data points.
Yeah, Doc, it's gonna be a hell of a long walk back to Hill Valley from here.
Still the safest plan. After all, we can't risk sending you back into a populated area or to a spot that's geographically unknown. You don't want to crash into some tree that once existed in the past. You don't want to crash into some tree that once existed in the past.
So was that just coincidence, or was it a truth drop? I tend to believe the latter now, because they're constantly giving us little clues and hints about things in the media. So I'm of the mind now, after all these years of looking into this, that literally anything can petrify. We're told that soft tissue can't petrify because the bacteria and larvae would eat away at the soft tissue long before the petrification process could ever happen. I believe that petrification can happen instantaneously or in extremely short periods of time. And I'll give lots of examples of that in a moment. But here we have two examples of petrified brain. And in my theories about biogeology, anything that was originally fat can petrify to different kinds of quartz, as can sap from trees. So organs, cysts, tumors, lymph nodes, any fatty encapsulation, all of that can become quartz. And then also things like fruit can petrify. Our bodies make stones. This is a gallbladder filled with hundreds of gallstones. And if you do cross sections of these stones, this is what it looks like here. And then also bezoars. This is basically the same thing, but here we go. This is in a horse or cow. They have these stones that they cut them in half, and you can see it looks just like a geode. And so a single body can make zillions of these stones. You saw the gallbladder, but also something like a lymph node could petrify to something that would look like a geode. And the human body has 600 lymph nodes in it, roughly. And then there's all the stones that we produce, kidney stones, etc. So any fatty encapsulation, and then also things like fruits, seeds, nuts, even fungus, any of this stuff could potentially petrify to different kinds of geology. And so that would explain why we have such a rich and diverse geological kingdom when it comes to all the minerals and the gemstones and everything. These are known as concretions, and they are really fascinating structures. And there are lots of different theories about how these form. And one of my theories is that they could be giant seeds or potentially fruit from these great trees, which we're going to see more of in a second. But what if a tree like this was gigantic and then laid down, and each of these berries were to petrify? Might you get something like what we just saw, where you have loads of these concretions? This is from Mungo Jup, a video from the Thunderbolts project called Instant Fossilization. And he's showing these examples of how even jellyfish, these soft tissue creatures, can petrify in amazing detail. Here's a petrified fish in the process of consuming another fish. So how fast would the petrification have had to happen there? It's just lots of questions about mainstream narratives when it comes to how long things take to form. This is clearly not something that took hundreds of millions of years to form. Looks like, I don't know, an engine or a drivetrain or transmission. I don't know what that is. I'm not a car guy, but just you know, examples of these things. So this is a guy talking about pipes.
Caves that they say are millions of years old. This right here took 6 months to form. Here's the question. Here's a dinosaur vertebrae. If these right here can form in that length of time, anywhere between weeks to months to years, how long does it take to fossilize a dinosaur bone? If the creationists are right, then it's 4,500 years, no older. What do you think? I'm about to show you 5 different examples of rock forming quickly. Then I'm going to ask you a question about a dinosaur bone I'm going to show at the end. From Karlovy Vary in the Czech Republic, mineralized water went through these pipes and formed this in 80 years.
So yeah, these are just little factoids that really disrupt what we understand about how long it takes for things to form. So why do things petrify? Peramineralization is the mainstream narrative, like the petrified trees, which we're told take hundreds of millions of years. It's the earth, the mud, the minerals that are in those things that surround the fleshy tissue or the tree, and they slowly work their way in while the gas and water works its way out. That's the mainstream narrative of how things petrify, but we're told it takes millions of years. But there are a lot of other things that can lead to petrification. You'll see examples in a moment. High mineral content waters, lightning, volcano, which would be an ash mixed with mineral water. So anytime you get major volcanic activity, you're also going to get tsunamis, and the tsunamis are going to bring your mineral-rich water. Transmutation of elements. This can happen both through high force and through chemical, but also biological methods. I'll give examples of artificial petrification as well, and then water and limestone. So basically plasma cold fusion. This is a theory that a friend of mine has, and we'll talk about more. This is Lake Natron, a lake in, I can't remember the country, but high mineral content waters, things fall in, they don't get out. And this is an artist that's just fished them out and positioned them for photography purposes. But they start to be encased, and then eventually they fully harden. This is an example of what electricity can do to things. So plasma, and it creates these fractal-like Lichtenberg figures is what this is known as. And so this is what's happening in wood. But what if that were to be happening on a much, much larger scale? And we have this incredible examples of amazing volcanic activity. The largest volcanic, not eruption, but electrical activity ever seen happened just last year, or the year before. I'll show a photograph of that. These are Lichtenberg figures, and this is formed through electricity. We're told that this is rivers that are forming this in the case of something like the Grand Canyon. But if you just think about it logically, it really doesn't make sense, in my opinion. So this is that plasma storm that I was talking about. Now imagine, the volcanic ash is a wonderful conductor for the plasma. So if there were volcanoes erupting everywhere, filling the skies across the world with volcanic ash, what kind of plasma activity could we potentially have? And this is the Grand Canyon, and from the sky, it looks identical to a Lichtenberg figure. We have examples of supernatural petrification throughout all the mythologies and religious texts. The Phoenix event, Medusa, we talked about, Cthulhu, the thunderbolts of the Thunderbirds from the Lakota Indians, the blue star Kachina. The Bible talks about Sodom and Gomorrah, everyone being turned to pillars of salt, and describes the glittering sword of God. And then we have mythological technologies in the Hindu texts, like the Vajra and the Fashis. And so all of the civilizations have these flood myths, and then we have lots of examples of man-made instant petrification as well, which I'll show in a moment. So petrified wood I talked about. We can grow opals. We can make rubies in microwaves. I'll show you a little bit of that in a moment. So Girolamo Sagato and Paolo Guarini were Italian scientists that in the 1800s knew how to petrify flesh. So this is examples of artificial petrification. It can be done with plasma, and we'll see that in a microwave in a moment. Then there's all kinds of theories about super secret weapons that the military has that can also do this, Caesar technologies, and on and on. So this is a guy, he's got a channel with like 1.5 million subs. He does different scientific experiments. He's mixed together 2 different kinds of powder. He's got a crucible and a ceramic lid, and I think he puts a little steel wool in there. He puts it in a microwave, and in a matter of 10 seconds is able to make raw ruby. Now, these aren't the quality that he could make a fortune off of selling, but the fact is that these are the second hardest on the hardness scale after diamond. So he's able to convert in 10 seconds using the magnetron of a microwave. He's able to convert powder into ruby. So what else is possible? This is Girolamo Sagato's work. There are museums in Italy to this day that still have these petrified body parts. You could petrify any part of the body. Brain, organs, hearts, kidneys, you name it. Paolo Guerini, another one, he also petrified hearts and brains. This is Mother Shipton's Cave in England, where they have high mineral content waters, where people go and they hang objects, and the water rolls down the objects and then encases them, and then eventually they harden completely. These are bog bodies. I didn't know about this until last year, but the bodies fall into peat bogs. These are found, I think, primarily in the UK. I'm not sure where else in the world, but it has a very interesting effect on the bodies, where the muscles and the organs dissolve, the muscles and the bone dissolve, whereas the organs harden and remain in a big fatty sac, which is the skin. So it's gruesome, but imagine you have hardened organs, and then afterwards this sac is dissolved and just becomes earth, and then those organs are finished off and become stone through a paramineralization process. Very plausible. We talked about opals coming from trees. They can also be grown artificially. And this is stone that's found around the world that looks a whole heck of a lot like petrified flesh. I don't know what the mainstream narrative is on how that is formed. This was photographs sent to me by one of my subscribers, and they had a bucket of acorns that were under the awning of their home. And so as it rained, the rainwater came down and dripped into this bucket, and over the course of a year, these things petrified fully. So there's an infinite variety of outcomes. You've got all kinds of different tissue types. You've got animal and plant tissues. You've got the fungi kingdom. You've got acidity, alkalinity, whatever surrounds the object, if that's what's causing the petrification. If there's varying degrees of decay is going to affect it as well. If there's fungus or slime or bacteria present, and whatever the underlying cause of petrification is going to result in different outcomes as well. So this is not settled science by any means. It's something. It's the very beginning of looking at things through new eyes, and what are things really, and do the mainstream geological narratives make any sense in light of the visual empirical evidence that seems to contradict things, unless you believe these long sought explanations. So how can geologists be wrong about something that's so obvious? I already talked about paradigm blindness. Some are suffering from expertitis, another word I coined, where, the inflammation of being an expert. You think you know everything about your little niche, and so you're blinded to other possible explanations. And we talked about compartmentalization. Geologists in general are not anatomists, so why would they recognize possible anatomical features? So a lot of people ask where the trees went, and they're still here. I'm going to skip that. The idea being that a lot of this material has been mined. Why would they lie to us about such a thing? This is the largest excavation. Whoop. This is the largest excavation site in the world, or it's said to be, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that mining operations happen on a far grander scale than we realize, but we don't recognize it because it's just geology as far as what we are seeing. But the there's so much example of terraforming on a massive scale, and lots of geological phenomenon that look exactly like what this scooper is doing. There's a famous spot called the wave, and they have explanations when it comes to geology about how that wave formed, but could it have just been from some giant mining operation? And you can see even steampunk mining operations were capable of doing some pretty remarkable things. This is looking at now we're going to get into some of the data points for the great trees, looking at salt mines and things like the marble caves of Patagonia. Does the mainstream geological narrative with the sedimentary layering make sense? Or is it more likely that this was something that was biological and petrified to stone? And this here and here are salt mountains. And these are the marble caves. How does layering produce this kind of a structure? And these are the salt mines. There's many in Poland, and I can't remember the other places, but you can see what appears to be tree grain all throughout the entire structure. Again, I'm not saying this is tree. I'm saying it looks like tree, and it's just one of many data points. This is just a woman walking through it. So if we go back to what wood looks like, it looks identical. And we find lots of structures around the world that just like boggle the mind when you think of it from a mainstream geological narrative. But if you think of it as wood, skip that, hold on, then it makes a whole lot more sense. Take a look at this. I'm trying to cram a 4-hour presentation into 90 minutes, so I hope you can go back and look at this stuff up close. I have live streams on my channel. Now this is sandstone. And if you look at all the different ways in which this manifests, it also boggles the mind from a mainstream explanation perspective. How do these structures form when you get these diagonal lines and then you have a separation? If you look at how tree manifests, it's identical. It does this kind of stuff all the time. And I think this is self-evident proof that the trees were once real. This is in the Garden of the Gods. This is a place called Red Rock, I think, in Colorado. This is Angel's Landing in Zion. And if you examine these sites in detail, each one of them appears to be tree, just on a scale that's unfathomable. We're talking about trees that were miles wide at the base and stretched up into the heavens. This is what's known as banded iron, and you get these swirls. And again, the Earth just did one thing, and then it went back, and then it did another, and it's just going back and forth between these different, completely distinct shapes. Does that make more sense as something that grew, or as something that formed by random layering of dead plant life and animal life? More examples of banded iron. Now we get into some really, to me, slam dunk evidence of the great trees. This is Petra here on the left. And there's a lot of sandstone dwellings around the world where they've carved in. And the narrative is that they carved into stone using primitive Bronze era, not weapons, but tools. And I don't think that's what happened. I think that they carved, after the great trees fell, they carved into them while they were still wood. And this is, again, Petra. And I struggle to see any other explanation of how this kind of thing could form other than that this was once wood. And I've yet to hear from any geologist or any critic any explanation that makes sense for how this could form in the mainstream geological narrative. And then we get into these massive structures in Norway, mountains in general. Start to look at them through new eyes. You start to realize, wow, they manifest tree grain in every way. And it's just on a scale we were taught not to see. Which leads to the question, why the lie? Why would they lie about something so beautiful, so magnificent about our past? And I think it's, you know, it's money is one aspect of it. If they know where the big trees are and where the big fallen titanic creatures are, and everyone else believes that it's just sedimentary layering, they're going to have a jump on where to find the precious materials. Gold and silver all harvested in quartz seams. And so there's gold in the trees, and that's just a fact. And when you look at these structures, this is where they're finding gold. And they're going in and they're breaking down this quartz and they're extracting the gold and the silver and the copper and other things from it. I have videos touching on each one of these different topics specifically on my channel, going into far more detail. And so take a look at some of these images here. Oops. There we go. Oh, there's a bunch of pictures there, but they didn't scroll like they were meant to. So we're told that petrified sap is amber. Amber is a 2.5 on the hardness scale. Diamond is a 10. Ruby is a 9. Quartz, this is quartz, is a 7.5. So if this were to petrify to stone, I would expect it to be a lot harder than something that you can dent with your fingernail, which is a 2.5, which is amber. So if you can, you know, I think of amber as oxidized sap, not as petrified sap, as we're told. There's an infinite variety of color and different ways in which sap manifests. And any one of these could petrify into something that would be a beautiful geological specimen. And yeah, here's the beautiful examples I wanted to show you before. This is from the Black Hills of South Dakota, which is I highly recommend the YouTube channel Hangman1128. Mike has done incredible work, boots on the ground. And on my channel, there's a dozen or so 1 to 2 minute videos. If you scroll down, if you click on videos and then you look at them in order of posting, go down about 10 videos and you'll see all these short little clips where you can see these sites in HD up close and moving around, and you'll see that it's clearly tree, every bit of it. And anyone who says otherwise, I would say, you know, check your eyes. So we have these examples of trees that are tapping into water that's underground, and these are pouring out. And if the trees were this big once upon a time, what would you expect these channels that permit this water to come through to look like? Well, there's a couple of guys called the Action Adventure Twins, and they've gone and they're spelunking in these giant caves that until a little over a year ago I didn't even know existed. And I'll show you some video clips, but you can see that just you know, breaking into some of these trees that are tapped into this water, the water can shoot out like a fire hydrant. So what would happen if those great trees existed and they were cut down or they were felled through some cataclysm? Might it lead to worldwide flooding? I think probably so. How much water would those trees have held? This is a guy just going into a fallen tree, or he's going into a tree root. And pay close attention to what the inside of this looks like as he climbs up into the central portion. And now imagine this on a grand scale. What would that look like? Would it look perhaps something like this? And these guys are going into structures that go down 500 to 1,000 feet, and then they go through snaking passages, and then they find another bit that goes down another 500 feet. Absolutely incredible videos. And the question is, are they going through root structures of trees? Now, even if you believe the mainstream narrative, and that this was somehow carved out by water movement during a far a very antique time period in the Earth. Why wouldn't this be smoothed out? Why are these chunky like this? There's no signs of water erosion as you get into this. There was a tale that some geologists did a LiDAR investigation of Devil's Tower and uncovered a gigantic root structure below it, and then that data just kind of disappeared. So I don't know if that was a fairy tale or if there's any truth to it. But you can see here that these are not channels that have been carved by water, otherwise they wouldn't be rough and chunky like this. And this is them just going down and down and down, and then they get to these other areas where they snake through. Come on, it's not working. All right, never mind. But Action Adventure Twins, I highly recommend. And that's also not going. Video stopped working for some reason. Okay, so these are lava tubes. And I'm just going to fly through this now because I want to, we've already gone almost an hour and a half, and I just want to briefly touch on some of my own research when it comes to things that I've discovered, because I've just been talking about biogeology as a whole, and I've done a lot of work on titans and on what I call petrified organs. These are the tepuis I mentioned before, salt mines, and how I originally got on the subject was this work by Jay Dreamers. He was consolidating a lot of different theories that were out there that were being presented, and he put this video together, and I saw him show these pictures of elephant-looking structures. And there's a mountain here in Javia, in the town that I live in Spain, that is called Montgo. And so I started to, it's known as the elephant, and you'll see this picture here. This is what it looks like from the side, and it's got what appears to be an eye socket in the right place. It's known affectionately as the elephant because of its shape and its look from multiple angles, not just from one. And so I, rather than lose my mind and open my mind so much that my brain falls out, I decided to approach it from the scientific method as best I could. And so boots on the ground work and a lot of anatomical investigation. So this would be the spine. This is the head. This whole portion has collapsed. That would be where the left eye and ear would be. The right eye and ear are very much intact, as you'll see in a moment. And even what appears to be the structures of ribs. And this is the erosion of the mountain here, the skirt of the mountain. So I got on Google Earth and I was just like, there's no way this could be true. And so the way I decided to approach it is look in depth at elephant anatomy and look at the skull structure and the bone structure and look at where these bones meet. These are called suture lines. This is the frontal and the maxilla. And then you have fissures in here where the optic nerve goes, and these lead back into the sinuses. And I didn't know this when I began this investigation, but there's channels right here in this portion of the cave in here that go back and enter into a much larger cave, or not much larger, but a very large cave inside and below, which is exactly where our sinuses would be. Whoops, I'm not using the laser pointer now. So the sinus is there. And then we have this hole here in our jaw, in our skull, known as the infraorbital foramen. It's bigger in elephants, and it sits in front of the eye socket. And the mountain itself it appears to be lying on its stomach with its head tilted backward. So I've been up here many, many times, and I've got lots of boots on the ground footage of video from all within the eye, going back into the deeper portion of the cave. And isn't it interesting that not only is it shaped like an eye socket with what, in humans, we would call this the eyebrow ridge, but in elephants, it's shaped exactly the same. and you have lines like this one here, which are present in the mountain in the correct place. And then from here to here going through, you have a hole, and this is what that hole looks like. What are the odds? You know, it starts to get very, very specific as you get into the details of just the eye socket alone. So this is what that would look like. And for example, here, there's this line that goes between the frontal bone and the maxilla, and that suture line is at this exact placement in the cave. And if you notice, these are overlapping layers of rock. It's not a crack in the rock. This is two different structures that are meeting. And this is potentially the remains of the eyeball, and it's in the exact correct place. And I talked about fat being petrified to quartz. The whole back side of the structure is covered in a 10-inch thick layer of quartz. Right here where the optic fissure would be is this structure in the cave. And you just have to get into odds. What are the odds of these things happening? This was a mind blow for me later as I got into the research, that this discoloration that looks like a quarter moon, it almost looks like an ear was removed from here. And what I didn't know is that there's actually a cave up here, and that cave enters in, and it's been excavated by archaeologists, and you'll see their work in a moment, where they've gone in, and this has the appearance of the cochlea, which is this spiral organ in the body. This guy is going around a curve, and it was just absolutely mind-blowing. You can see this in the Unveiling a Titan series, and hopefully, no, why is that? Let me get back in, share again. Video is not working here. Are we okay on time for a little bit more? I definitely want to leave time for questions and answers at the end.
Yeah, no, we're good, Mike.
All right. So there we go. They went in, it's at 375 meters altitude. You need ropes to get to it. They did 3D mapping of the inside. They recorded with 3D cameras as well. This is him going around the corner. They found bodies up there. They found cave paintings that appear to look like four-legged creatures with horns, and also what appears to be a deluge of creatures falling from the skies. There's your four-legged creature, and then also that looks a lot like a deluge to me. That's limestone. That's the whole mountain is made of this kind of limestone. And interestingly enough, I didn't know this when I began this research, but limestone in mainstream geology is said to be bone. I'll show you what I mean by that in a moment. This is that crystalline structure that I was talking about. That's the backside of this jutting upward. It's like a wave that's about to crash. And if the eyeball were to have blown out and the remains of that were to petrify, this is exactly what it would look like. It would be petrified in quartz, and you can see the quartz layer here. And this is what the backside of an eyeball looks like. So again, it's like, what are the odds? Just in the eye alone, there are over 20 anatomical and histological correlations. And then there's the ear to take into consideration the overall shape of the mountain. After I started doing videos on this subject, Google Earth changed. And I had been looking at Google Earth for literally a couple of years. And I was in the middle of a live stream, an interview, and I went to go show these structures, and the eyeball had been closed up and the ear had been marked off. Now you could claim that this is a rendering glitch, but what are the odds? This is before I was using Google Earth as a drone, because you're not allowed to fly drones there. So I was able to get all of this 3D footage because it was high quality footage of the mountain on Google Earth. So you can see as you come in from far away, and now you can see here what it looks like now to this day. So what a coincidence that what you could see clearly before, now you can only see if you get up close and you wait for it to open up. Mainstream geology tells us that limestone is sedimentary rock composed mainly of skeletal fragments, marine organisms such as coral, forams, and mollusks, endo and exoskeleton. So even in the mainstream narrative, they're telling us that limestone is bone, and isn't that interesting? So I've got this 6-part series going in depth into all of this. The 6th part is really fascinating. I go in with 1000x microscopy and I show that the mainstream narrative when it comes to the limestone is categorically false. There's no hint of shellfish, mollusk, coral anywhere. And in fact, let me show a little video here. This is what this stuff looks like with the naked eye. All over the mountain, you either have 2 kinds of stone. It's either thick blocks that are in layers that have very little vascularity, which is these holes, or you have what looks like trabecular bone, which is this Swiss cheese kind of bone that's found in the center of our bones, which makes up it's where our blood is produced. And you can see here what this looks like up close and personal. No sign of shellfish, mollusk anywhere. And this, I struggle to see how anything like this could be formed by water erosion, which is what they tell us, is that water is creating fissures and those fissures widen because these bifurcate. You have these holes that go in and then they break off into other channels in different directions. And then along with this, all over the mountain, you have red earth, we have quartz everywhere, and then you have loads of iron ore, and these are all the components of blood. You have plasma, which is a form of fat. It's long-chain fatty acids. If you remove all the water from blood plasma, you are left with a crystalline structure. And if you remove the water from the red blood, you've got your iron ore, which is in the blood vessels. And this is what the plateau and the whole mountain looks like. It's a combination of very rich red earth. There's Moltko in the background. And iron ore, you can see it caked to the side there. And then these channels that are going through it all. And so these are the coincidences. There's over 50 that line up. You can just pause that and read those one by one if you like. And that led to a whole other line of discovery, which has to do with petrified organs. I found this rock in a river bottom. I recognized immediately that it had a bunch of different features that matched up with heart anatomy, which didn't make any sense because we're told soft tissue can't petrify. I started cataloging them, and there were over 15 different anatomical features that were present in this stone. Later, with endoscopic cameras, I went in and it's now over 20 different anatomical features. You have, I'm not going to go into them because of time, but you can see this is known as the isthmus in the heart, and this structure is present in the rock. This is where the aorta and the vena cava would be. Those are exactly in the right place. There's chambers inside, which I've gone into with endoscopic camera. The outside is white. Everywhere it's worn away is blood red. If you get it underwater, it looks like a heart. Oh, something is playing. Hold on. 1 second. There's a video playing there. All right. So these are what hearts look like. They all take on different sizes and shapes and forms. I started with a video about this where I cataloged the structures that were in the heart, and then I said, well, using the scientific method, it should be repeatable, it should be scalable, it should be very specific, and it should be predictable. And these are all of those things. You can see here the different shapes that hearts take. These are just a sampling of heart stones. I've got a video that catalogs the best of the collection and shows how it matches up perfectly with anatomy. People sometimes ask why they're white. The whiteness, the heart is, we think of it as mainly muscle, but it's not. It's mainly a fascial complex that is filled with blood, and the reddish color of the heart is primarily coming from the blood. but well, you'll see here. These are people that are growing organs in laboratories.
Of a
and
whole
watch
functional organ.
as she lets
but
the blood into the heart.
The field has struggled with the ability to make sure that once you get cells into whatever scaffold or matrix you're using, that then there's a problem with getting all the media, the nutrients, all the things that the cells need to stay alive. And so the beauty of perfusion decellularization is we start with all that architecture intact, and more importantly that all the blood vessels, all the vasculature system is still intact. So when we introduce cells back into that organ, they will already have a natural supply and be able to be fed with, oxygen and nutrients, and we don't have to worry about trying to establish that became system. So we've
read like a typical heart. It's mostly fascia. So a lot of these heart stones are white, and if you break them open, you can see traces of blood in them. In some of them, I've made a video about that where I've gone out in the field, I've broken them open. I've had them CAT scanned, and they have chambers inside. And these chambers, if that was water erosion, that should be smooth in there. But instead it's bumpy, just like what's known as trabecular carne, which is the inner portion of the heart muscle. And it's I've sliced them open, I've polished them, and this is a example of how specific some of these are. I won't go into the cardinal features right now for lack of time, but they have these suture lines, which are basically where the different parts of the heart muscle meet, and they are highly specific. The heart, when it's contracting, I don't know, can you see me on screen right now?
Yep.
Okay, so when the heart is contracting, it does if seen from the bottom, it does this spiral contraction. These stones have that spiral, that twist at the bottom. They have the suture lines at the top. They have the indentations where the aorta and the vena cava would be. They're tapered in on the sides because when the heart goes into contraction, which it would do on rigor mortis, which is when we die, all the muscles of the body get hard. Then it's going to curve in on the sides because of the shape of the ventricles. If they're put under water, they turn red. And it just goes on and on and on with the coincidences. You can see how red that is underneath. So there's one there that I've sliced open and polished, and you can see that it's red and has the remains of a blood vessel on the inside. And this last one, now you know the basics. You've got the white outer shell, and then you have the aorta and the vena cava on top, exactly where it should be. So it's highly repeatable, scalable, specific, and this is the evolution the evaluation criteria, and that gets into boiled egg theory. Maybe we can take that in questions and answers. I think I'm about done, and this has to do with some other things, and I might show this. Let me just look at my slides here. Yeah, okay. So I'll just pause there, and then I'll show a couple other things briefly as we're talking, and I can go back to the chair in a moment. So it's a lot to go through.
That's great.
So just open it up to questions if anyone's curious about anything.
So first question, on those stones that you found, did you find them all in the same place? And
they're found all over. Oh, go ahead. You weren't done.
No, I was just wondering if there was an explanation as to why there'd be so many hearts in a particular area, or you're finding them in rivers, or where are you sort of finding them in general?
I find them all over. They can be buried in earth. They can be in river bottoms. River bottoms are the easiest place to find them because all the earth has been washed away. And the mainstream geological tale of these stones is that they're clumps of clay that have hardened under the sedimentary layering, and then on their way to metamorphic rock, but not completely metamorphic rock. And then that, because of tectonic activity, those pop out, and then they end up, they're broken fragments, and then they roll around in river bottoms, and that's what smooths them out and makes them the way they look. And I reject that notion because of the high specificity and repeatability of this phenomenon. I have them from just millimeters in length up to, I've got one in my office that's 1.5 feet. Bigger than that, I haven't wanted to bring home because I don't want to injure myself. I've had people send me them from all over the world. I can show a picture in a moment of ones that have been sent in by others. My theory as to why they're found outside the body, I call boiled egg theory. I'll just share again briefly here. And okay. So the idea being, we've already talked about things transmuting and petrifying. So I think of it like this: if you boil an egg, it hardens because the proteins are denaturing, and the more you cook it, the harder it gets. So an eggshell will break, and the inner portions will leak out if you cook it too fast or too long. Whereas the fatty layer of the heart is very, very flexible. It's the thickest of the layers protecting the organs in the body. So that means the heart would be most likely to survive cataclysm. So I call it boiled egg theory because you have the chest and abdominal cavities are themselves big fatty containers that are filled with liquid, and then the organs are suspended in that. So I didn't understand how organs could be found outside of the body because it made no sense in the mainstream geological narrative. But this is an example of hearts that have been sent to me from around the world, of heart stones. And whether or not they're all hearts, I can't say, but they sure match up with the anatomy and the color to a high degree of specificity. Where would the bones go? We already talked about bog bodies, the bones, and and the muscles. Why are these organs being found outside of the body? Well, if you take bone and you cook it inside of a crock pot for a day, it first turns to sponge and then eventually turns to a gelatinous quartz-like substance, and then it'll harden if you let that cool. So the boiled egg theory is basically the idea that initially I was exploring the idea of volcanoes, that the heat of a volcano, we talked about pyroclastic flows and the 1400 degrees Celsius moving at the speed of sound, that would probably very quickly destroy a human body or any other kind of creature's body. And while it's destroying the outer portions, the inner part of the body would boil, and that would cause those organs to harden. This is my theory. I haven't managed to reproduce a petrified organ. At some point, maybe someone else will. I'm a vegetarian, so the idea of going to butchers and experimenting with organs is not on my list. But yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah. So giants, titans, the difference between the two, were they around at the same time?
I think they were. Yeah, I think, we have our trees today that are a certain size, and we're a certain size in relationship to them. And if you look at trees across the world, they're far more plentiful than we are. So titans would be far less plentiful than trees when it comes to the remains and petrification. A lot of people have, wondered, like, well, where are all the titans? I think they're mountains, a lot of them, and they're covered in vegetation, and a lot of it has been mined. And there's, like, in this entire region, every single mountain in this region of Spain that I'm in has limestone terraces. And the limestone, when it isn't broken up, has a very biological look to it with these channels going in. But this has been broken up with sledgehammers or something, and they've taken all these chunks of limestone and they've made these limestone terraces that stretch all the way up to basically where the mountain is a cliff. And this whole region was once cultivated. Like 1% of the terraces are currently being used. It boggles the mind. In the 6th Unveiling a Titan video, I go into that and show that these mountains once looked very different than they do today, and it's hard to know exactly how they looked like. Maybe they look like creatures. Maybe they look like different kinds of vegetation.
As far as timing goes, now that you've sort of established that the timelines, and I think most of us would all believe the same thing, these idea of millions and millions of years ago, and this sort of stuff is probably all false. Do you have any thoughts on what sort of timeline are we looking at for most of this stuff?
I think the Earth is probably far younger than we've been told. And as far as dating and timelines, I have no idea. It's not, when you look into things like carbon dating, apparently it's very accurate to thousands of years. And then if you get, as you get beyond thousands of years, it becomes very inaccurate. And if you get into millions of years, it's just a crapshoot as far as how old something is. And even that as a technique for dating is called into question by people who've sent things that are obviously very young in for analysis and gotten back very old dates. So each one of the different kinds of dating technologies has been contested along the way. A lot of times those criticisms are coming from young Earth creationists, Christians who also are into geology and might even have PhDs, but they see things through different eyes, and so then they're criticized for their beliefs, and they're just not seeing the obvious because of the filter that they're putting on everything. And I think it might be the other way around with the majority of geologists, that they're blinded by their paradigm, and that a lot of what we've been told about geology is bullshit, and that you can demonstrably see lots of different anomalies, as I've shown in the mainstream narratives.
And then I guess with ancient texts, like biblical texts, or you talk about Greek mythology, these sorts of things, these become more realistic in a lot of what we're researching. So do you see that a lot in your research, that there's ancient texts that talk about these types of things more?
I do. I haven't gone into those texts. I haven't been an avid reader when it comes to the ancient texts, like the Bible, the Book of Jasher, the Book of Enoch, the extra, what do you call them? The apocryphal texts of the Bible. There's something like 30 different books that have been removed from the Bible. Well, those tell some very interesting stories. The Book of Enoch talks about the Titans, and talks about the great trees. It talks about the angels going to work at the great trees. And the Book of Jasher as well. You have all the mythological tales from the different, the Native American Indians and the Greek myths. So I think that these are actual accounts of what happened in the past, and maybe it's put in a metaphorical context so that it can be passed on orally. But I think that they're talking about very literal times, and the more I put out on my channel and the more research I did, the more people coming from a Christian biblical background were sharing different things with me. And there's a famous line in the Bible that the stones will cry out one day, and maybe that's what they're doing now. As we start to look at them, they're crying out with evidence of a world that's very different from what we were taught.
I've got a few questions in the chat that I'll read out as well. Have you heard anything about the Himalayan salt is the petrified remains of the Nephilim giants?
Could very well be. It's got a very, blood-like look to it in many cases. And I think pretty much, except for igneous stone, which is lava that's cooling, I think everything that we see at one time or another, and probably far more recently, was biology. And that's why I use the term biogeology to distinguish from the mainstream narratives. And also, I didn't mention this, but the mainstream geological narratives are embedded 100% with heliocentrism and the stories that were told about the Big Bang and how old the universe is. And so the two support each other. So if one falls apart, the other falls apart.
Yeah, we've got a few people talking about. So one was the hexagonal rock formations around a particular area in Australia. And where I grew up in Tasmania, they've got what they call the tessellated pavement. It looks like a pavement, but they're all basically blocks. And their explanation is water's doing this and all the rest of it, but it doesn't make sense as to how it's doing it. That water doesn't seem to work in these particular shapes in any other capacity. And then all of a sudden water creates these formations. So so do you think all of that would be linked to biology? And what potentially, if you see a hexagonal sort of thing in patterns, or a rectangular, consistent rectangular sort of thing, what sort of things would you think that would link to potentially in the biology?
Yeah, the hexagonal structures could be, both plant life, trees, or potentially something like tendon. There's a lot of theories that have to do with that. I think again, I think absolutism is not the way to go. I don't think everything was once biology. There's lots of examples of different structures that were that have become mountain, that were once very, very large structures. I turned my nose up at meltology for a while because some of the stuff that was being presented was absolutely nutty, but I've seen some pretty compelling evidence that that's also the case. And that's why I had that slide at the beginning that the answer is likely E, all of the above, that we've got Starfort remains, we've got Tartaria, we've got biogeology in the form of titanic trees and titans, and also things like petrified organs, it seems, that are all over the place. And so I think it's a bit of all of this. And one of the ways that they get us is through divide and conquer strategies. So you get these little factions of people who think they're suddenly experts in things and everything else is wrong because my theory is right, instead of looking at how things dovetail and overlap. We need to have a more syncretic approach to looking at this stuff. Like I was saying in the beginning about cross-cultural or cross-disciplinary, research is the way to go when it comes to this kind of thing.
So one thing I discovered when I started to research different things was that, and in particular, I went down the child trafficking route, and the deeper you went, you'd sort of find more and more information. But what I started to find over more recent years is that people are starting to infiltrate. And so now they're trying to sort of discredit from within some of these ideas. Are you seeing that in your areas at all, where you think that there's absolute shills that are coming in to just sort of throw different things out? Or are you sort of finding that it's fairly isolated, that it's not a big enough concept at this stage for those sorts of things?
I think the short answer is yes. There's also the idea that the devil uses honest men to do some of his best work. And so I think, people, like I said before, they might think they know a lot about something, and so then they're really passionate about it, and they're actually leading people astray unintentionally. I think controlled opposition is a very real thing, and the best way to control the opposition is to lead it. So if you're an intelligence agency, you're going to have your agents in place in advance when you know that a particular movement is going to form. As people start to wake up to different lies, you're going to have people there that are seeding really, really good information and then are going to deflect and lead people astray at key moments, or self-destruct by making themselves look like idiots after a long time, where they come out with lots of great info and then they champion some particular idea that makes them look like a crackpot. So mainstream normie people are not going to pay attention to a word they say because this person's obviously crazy. And then there's so many different possible scenarios, but I think definitely there's infiltration, and I think that there's a lot of egos involved as well, and people who aren't willing to admit they're wrong once they've come across data that contradicts their little pet theory.
Have you personally had any attacks on you from those sorts of groups?
Interestingly enough, I thought I would get a lot more heat from, mainstream geology, and there hasn't been much. Every once in a while, somebody comes into a comment section and they make a statement that makes it clear that they haven't actually reviewed the information that I presented, because I addressed the questions they're raising from many of them from the very first video I ever made on my channel. And so some of the harshest criticism has actually come from within, for example, the flat Earth community, if you want to call it that. And I've addressed that in some of my videos. But it's amazing how, for something like examining Earth shape, you have to have a very open mind to even begin to go in that direction. And then to get enough information where you are confident that the world is not what they told us it is, you have to have done a lot of study. Either that or you're just gullible. And yet people can go through that whole process and still get to a point where they're extremely closed-minded as soon as an idea doesn't match what they think is reality.
There's a couple more questions. So, do you believe that all mountains were originally trees?
No, and I think using the word all is always wrong.
Yeah.
You know, I think that many of the mountains were formerly trees, but some may be pyramids, some may be fallen titans, some may be former, gigantic buildings. You have to look at each thing on a case by case basis and get in there and look at things up close. If you go through the work of the, that I've done on the channel, and also Hangman 1128, looking at the evidence for the great trees, which I touched on a lot, and actually seeing the video footage as we walk around those structures, I think if you're not brainwashed by the mainstream narrative, you'd be hard pressed to conclude anything other than this is tree I'm looking at. But it's impossible in the mainstream narrative that a tree could have been so big, because it begs the question, how big was the Earth? How could such a tree stretch up so high if it would be up above the atmosphere? We're talking potentially tens or hundreds of miles into the sky. It's an absurd notion if we're on a ball that's 24,000 miles, 24,901 miles in circumference. It doesn't fit. So this kind of information kind of requires another view on what the world is. Doesn't mean you have to know conclusively what it is, but you have to be open-minded to other possibilities.
So Jack and the Beanstalk could be true?
There's another one. I didn't mention that one, Jack and the Beanstalk, right? And you've got Paul Bunyan, you got Jack and the Beanstalk, you've got so many tales of giants. And I mean, the evidence for giants, and I'm not talking about titans now, I'm talking about, people that were 9, 15, who knows, 50, 100 feet tall. That to me, it's just a matter of fact, but so much of the evidence has been destroyed and squirreled away by organizations like the Smithsonian, and UNESCO is controlling all of these sites that people like us would really love to get into and look at up close with a fine-tooth comb. You have to go on guided tours, and you're not allowed to see major portions of different sites, because they don't, they say they're protecting the sites, but oftentimes they're actually destroying them because they're going to rebuild them. And then you get all these critics about, well, they're rebuilding them based on their assumptions about how things looked, and they're actually destroying the original evidence in the process. And then we have so much examples of destruction around the realm when it comes to wars that are being fought. And it seems like some of those wars are just strictly to destroy the old world.
I guess another big lie that links into all of this is fossil fuels, and the idea that we've got this limited resources and dinosaurs have broken down, and that we're going to use up all the oil, and therefore we have to move to electric and all of these sorts of things. There's a whole big element that's assuming that it's not being made constantly.
Absolutely. This is one of the narratives I've touched on a lot on my channel, is this idea of manufactured scarcity. And when looking at the whole Tartarian idea of this great civilization that once existed, that built all of our mosques and cathedrals and these buildings that appear to potentially have antiquitech, that they were actually functioning as devices and might have been healing people and gathering energy from the ether, which we're told doesn't exist, and tapped into the water flow, and they're amazing. And when we have these kinds of the remains of these structures, and we know that someone like Tesla wanted to bring us free energy, and we're constantly told that no, there's a limited amount of things here, and we have to save our resources, and we have to go to 15-minute cities because we're all going to run out, and there's too many of us here. It's absolute bullshit. This realm probably had 100 billion people at one time when you really see the scope and the scale. There's a small section in Africa. If you look at Africa like the size of a A4 piece of paper, and you take a size about the size of a quarter, that this area, it's a delta of a river that has all of these perfectly parallel ancient canals that are branching off. And a guy did some research on those canals, and he was just looking at how much food can we grow per acre, and how many people can that feed. And then he was extrapolating how many acres that one tiny little section of Africa had. And he estimated that it could have fed upwards of 10 billion people, that one little postage stamp on the continent of Africa. And then my friend Mike went in and he started looking at those canals up close, and found that they extended much further than this original researcher had noticed. And so it was a much larger area. And so that one little small section of Africa, based on how much we know can be grown in a single acre of land, was capable of feeding 20 billion people. And that's one tiny segment of one continent. And like I said here, terraces everywhere, maybe 1% or 2% are still cultivated. But when they were in their heyday, how many people was this region supporting? Spain is known as the breadbasket of Europe. The majority of the organic food is coming from this region, and they're growing huge amounts of food in Spain. So, and that's a small percentage of what used to be grown.
Yeah. Well, let's finish up because we're coming up to 2 hour mark. But this topic I find fascinating, and your knowledge is extensive. So I really thank you for coming on and sharing everything that you're working on. I feel like you've probably got more to share as well, so we probably need to get you back on at some stage as well.
I do. I could keep going for a long time. Each one of these topics is a presentation in and of itself, really, or multiple. I'd like to share one thing with the audience before we end, because in the process of doing this work on the stones, I came across information that utterly blew my mind about the nature of the heart itself, and the works of a man named Francisco Torrent Guasp, who was the discoverer of something known as the myocardioventricular band. And I'll just share my screen again real quick here and show a 1-minute video. This man for years was trying to help people understand that the heart is not what we were taught. And his discoveries led me to discover other things in the stones that I had already been gathering that I didn't recognize were there. And it was a true mind blow. So take a look at this video.
Did you know that almost everything you were taught about the heart is wrong? Most everyone today, even doctors, still believe the heart to be a 4-chamber pump that pushes blood through a mind-boggling 60,000 miles of narrowing blood vessels to fuel our 40 trillion cells, then filling again as if by magic on relaxation. Well, that theory was thoroughly debunked by the Spanish cardiologist Francisco Torrent Guasp back in 1972. After dissecting thousands of hearts, Guasp finally discovered the heart's true structure. The heart's far more amazing than we ever knew. It's like a rope, a long tube wrapped into a knot. Instead of being pushed, the blood is pulled through the heart in 2 spiraling vortexes. This has been proven with CAT scans, functional MRI, and positronic emission. Look at the spiraling contraction. It changes everything we know about the heart and circulation. If you'd like to know more, check out these videos.
So this was absolutely groundbreaking, mind-blowing information for me. I'd studied the heart a lot in school, and I didn't know about this. And when I saw this video about his life, and I saw these lines in the stones, I realized that a bunch of the stones that I had already been gathering had those lines in the right places, and also this spiral fibers of the heart at the bottom. I didn't know about that as well. And many of these stones have twists in the bottom that look like a propeller blade. And so this man worked his entire career out of a family practice in the Costa Blanca in Spain, which is where I live. And his home was literally on the foothills of Mont Go, which is this elephant mountain that I've been talking about throughout the presentation. So what are the odds of that? This man that made this incredible discovery that led to me recognizing more things in these heart stones could have lived his whole career in a home that was literally on the foothills of the same mountain. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share about that. And
are you aware that the heart has memory as well? Have you heard of that?
I haven't heard of heart memory, but it doesn't surprise me at all, knowing what I know about the heart.
So, so
Where would I go for information about that?
you can look it up. There's a couple of famous cases. They did a heart transplant, and they solved a murder case from the heart
Oh
transplant.
yeah, I remember hearing a story, and the guy had memories of the murder of who had killed him.
Yeah, and so there's that case, and but there's in the child trafficking space, we got into some MK Ultra victim sort of stories and everything, and they spoke about the heart memory and pulling them into line with the brain and aligning them, and some of the experiments and everything that they were doing, which obviously leads back to sort of the Nazi sort of stuff and everything. But yeah, something else that I didn't know about the heart, and then I did a bit of research on that, and it came up with these stories of memories that were passed on through heart transplants.
Yeah, well, with the Big Bang comes, a mechanistic view of the universe, atomism, reductionism, the false dichotomy between matter and spirit. We used to call it alchemy, and then they divided it up like all the woo goes over there and all the hard science goes over here. And that's all just a false construct that's designed, I think, to throw us off the track of truth in general. And so syncretism, alchemy, these kinds of things, this is the real true science. And again, I'd recommend my friend's book, A Fool's Wisdom by Stephen Young. Fantastic starting place for people who are not familiar with these subjects. And you should have him on to give a presentation as well.
Yeah, we've had him on. We're actually doing.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Yeah, he's going to come on for a regular series as well. So
oh, great.
Go through and break down all of those topics you just mentioned. So we're going to try to work on it and try to get it to almost like a kid's level so that we can do a homeschooling alternative. That's the plan with Steve.
May I share this on my channel? Because this is a presentation that I gave at Music and Sky that I wasn't able to to share on my channel because of the recording quality of it. But it'd be great, and even with the questions and answers, that'd be fun as well.
I'll send you a copy for sure.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you for the invite. I hope to maybe someday see you all in person. It'd be fun to come and present more of this in Australia with you guys.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing everything you've got. And just so everyone can follow, I'll share. You've got, let's have a look. You've got your page. Do you want to just give that is that the best place for people to find you?
It's the only place, really. At some point I'll have some books out, but I don't know when that'll be.
So I'll just share the page as well. So this is your page here, yeah?
Yeah, for anyone who wants to really go in depth through the evidence for the mountain, skip part 1. You're already well versed in it, and it's my most watched video on the channel because it's the start of the series, but I would have done a lot of things differently. If you go straight to video 2, it's way better. And by the time you get to video 6, I haven't had many people that have made it through all the videos that are still skeptics, and the ones who were once they saw what happened with the mountain and Google Earth, they're just like, all right, come on, what are the odds of that happening? So several people were on board at that point. And I'm right at the 30K mark almost. I think I've got like 10 subs left to hit 30K. So if you haven't subbed to the channel, sub to the channel.
Let's push you over that. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks again. We'll catch up soon and we'll get you back on for another chat if you're up for that.
Absolutely. Anytime.
All right.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thanks.